Hi, folks, and thanks for joining us here at SomeFuture for episode 12 of our podcast. We're your hosts, Jack and Chris.
Hey.
What's up? Today on Present Futures, we will be talking about two exciting stories, one on Elon Musk and the second one on skills needed for the future. On Paleo Futures, we will be talking about Herman Kahn. And on FizBiz, we will be discussing the future of work. And as always, we will have a prominent futurist as our guest. We hope that you enjoy our show, and please visit our website and blog where we'll be posting supporting materials at www.somefuture.org. Follow us on our Twitter handle @SomeFuture. And we always welcome your engagement with questions, concerns, or ideas of things you would like to hear about on our podcast by emailing us at somefuturepodcast@gmail.com or going to our Facebook where we have Some Future.
That's Some Future.
Okay, for my present futures today, we're going to talk about Elon Musk and ask the question, what are you up to now, Elon Musk?
I mean, again, I want to apologize for this just because he is, he's the futurist of our time. So we bring him up all the time. I think he was the first episode or whatnot. But okay, Jack, what is Elon Musk up to now?
Well, so I was actually going to... Keeping up with the theme, I was going to sing a little bit of "Where in the World is Elon Reeve Musk?" Because the dude is everywhere, literally.
Yeah, I know.
So again, for the umpteenth time, Elon Musk, the man simply does not stay out of the news for long. It's both a testament to his vision and also a great marketing point for Musk, as he has yet to accomplish much of what he talks about. All of the time. I mean, seriously, when does this dude sleep? Or when is he running his companies and not talking at conferences all the time? I mean, seriously, look it up. He has 1 billion talks all over the internet. He's everywhere. So, we're going to bring this up. So recently it was in the news that Elon Musk is in conversation with Mayor Rahm Emanuel of Chicago to potentially build an underground high-speed rail system from Chicago's O'Hare Airport to downtown Chicago. Talks are underway for Elon Musk to implement his idea of underground tunnels using his company that was launched in late 2016 called the Boring Company, or TBC. And that's boring, I guess, spelled the same way as boring, but it means tunnel boring.
I know. When I saw that, I was like, oh, why would they call it that? And I'm like, oh, yeah.
Well, so on this show, Chris and I have covered the fact that I think this is just some big publicity stunt that Elon Musk launched to get funding for this company, with eyes on SpaceX and creating such tunnels from Mars. At least that's my view. You have to hand it to Elon that this is not only getting people interested in the idea, due to the issues that we have with two-dimensional roadways. So Elon Musk's idea is to build these tunnels, have cars pulled up onto an electric platform, and then have the electric platform accelerate to as fast as 125 miles per hour. So, the cars themselves will not be driving anywhere. And of course, we'll post this. There's a cool video of it. We'll post the video after we publish our podcast. So obvious to say, this is a bit different, according to Mayor Emanuel's perspective. The idea is relatively the same, though. Boring large tunnels underground, which can be stacked on top of each other to allow for multiple roadways, and which can lead to a significant reduction in vehicle pollution, since we're talking electric here, and cutting down on drive times. So I have a question for you, Chris. So my question is this something that you think can realistically be done?
Well, so one thing I think kind of spurred this on was so Elon's big idea of these boring tunnels is because he's based in LA, right? And I was just actually in LA last week, and it's a beautiful city. It's amazing. The weather's great, and attractive people, and Hollywood, and all that cool stuff, right? And then of course the aerospace industry, was based there, and it's great because he was able to buy one of those big old factories to use for Tesla and SpaceX, and so he had this idea. Man, he's stuck in traffic, and he's like, you know what? I'll just dig a tunnel underneath LA so I'm not stuck in traffic. It's a very Elon Musk thing to do, right? To say. The thing about Elon Musk, not thing about him, but the thing about LA is that it's earthquake prone. There's earthquakes everywhere. So if you dig holes underneath the ground and there's an earthquake, I mean, the boring tunnels that to be a huge disaster. I mean, the amount of insurance that it would cost to run these things would be very crazy. So I'm wondering if this Chicago idea is because of LA's issues with earthquakes, and so maybe he hit a wall, and he's like, "Well, this is a great idea. We got to use it somewhere." So he picked a location. Reached out, and Chicago makes sense. I think it's. I'm not sure. I don't know the geology of Chicago, but I'm assuming it's not very earthquake prone. And and so why not? Let's try this out. It's a great idea, regardless, right? It is. Unfortunate part it is. We live on Earth, and there's tectonic plate action happening everywhere, and so you got to be careful. And maybe the worst place to actually do this tunnel idea is L.A. So I'm thinking. This is just my guess. I'm putting on my thinking hat and thinking, well, why did he do this? Why is he not continuing with LA and going to Chicago? My guess is that, and I don't know about you, but I think I might be right.
Well, I agree with you. I think that that as far as stability issues, I think we have even trouble keeping mines from collapsing. I do think it's an interesting idea, but I don't think it's economical to build these too. I mean, you talked about stability. I think the financial impact of it, I can't imagine. I mean, I personally believe the future of transportation is in the sky. I've covered that, and we've talked about it in some of our podcasts. Since it doesn't require this large investment in infrastructure, because all you have to do is have a plane in the air, which obviously there'll be other things involved. But I do think it will be interesting to see if this is something that will actually come to fruition in some form or another. So currently, the Boring Company is building a test tunnel on SpaceX's campus with a machine named Godot, as in the play Waiting for Godot. They did this. I think Elon's just getting more and more like philosophical, because he's like, all of his ideas seem to be working in some form or another. So he's like, man, I'm super awesome. I can do whatever I want. I'm just start naming things off of plays. So. And all of the future boring equipment will actually be named after poems or plays or something like that. So it's just pretty interesting. So Elon Musk has stated that the first route actually created, and you're right, will run from LAX to Culver City, then to Santa Monica and end in Westwood. He claims the tunnel trip will take about 5 minutes, compared to normal driving that can take up to 45 minutes in normal traffic to go from LAX to Westwood. The Chicago project, I think I agree with you. It's less risky as far as earthquakes go. But if it is agreed upon, I don't think so it's not supposed to start for another 3 years if it is agreed on. And then even then, there's no estimate to what the project of this scale would cost or when it could be completed. I just, for me, I mean, here's the thing is I think maybe Elon Musk is just an expert at PR, and it's just like, hey, we should invest in these tunnel boring machines. Because, I mean, here's the thing. The tunnel boring machines are being created on SpaceX's campus. So I think that he has the idea of Mars when he's thinking of these boring machines that could then eventually create caverns where people could live in Mars and stuff like that. I don't know. Maybe this is an idea. I mean, I've seen the video. It's a pretty cool concept. It would be pretty neat because all of those cars wouldn't be contributing to pollution because they would be on these electric platforms. So even if you didn't have an electric car, it would still be on the platform moving electrically. So that'd be a cool thing. It cut down on pollution. You could have many different levels. 20 feet down, you've got a road, and 10 feet down, you've got a road, or 30 and 20. That would be pretty neat. You could have roads over roads, so it'd cut down on congestion. I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think we know enough yet to see what the financial impacts and what the stability impacts are. So I think those are two things we'll look at, and we'll see where this goes. We'll see if this crazy idea is created or there's a hyperloop underneath the ground. Who knows?
All right, great. So for my present futures, we're going to go into actually a blog post that I put on our Facebook page. It's brand new, so for you folks listening, we've got a Facebook page. Feel free to look at it. It's the SomeFuture Podcast, at SomeFuture Podcast. Lots of stuff, 10, 12, 15 things a day that I throw on there. Just cool, random stream of consciousness stuff. So feel free to go check that out. But, back to the most important thing, I find that this has been one of the most important things that I've been talking to when it comes to the future of work. And Jack, we've been talking about the future of work a lot on the show, whether it comes to, universal basic income, whether it comes to automation, robots taking over, AI taking over. Everyone's very scared about what the future of work could be. So it was very interesting because I happened to find this infographic that was the 10 most important work skills in 2020. So it kind of got me thinking, like, what else is being said about the future work skills. So I figured we kind of talk a little bit about some of these work skills, and I'll actually point to other websites that talk about similar work skills. But essentially, a lot of these work skills, and I know that's like 4 or 5 times I keep saying the same thing, but a lot of these skills they're not exactly what you would think you would need, right? So I know when I got my MBA, I did not have a very aggressive, data or accounting or finance background. I actually had to work on those skills when I joined corporate America. But the skills that I'm seeing here are not necessarily just the straight up finance, accounting, or data science that you see. You need a STEM sort of degree, like engineering or technology or mathematics, anything along those lines. I think those are important, but it's really important to see these particular skills. So I'm talking about things like sense making, which is the ability to determine sort of deeper meaning beyond things. Social intelligence, the ability to connect with others. Adaptive thinking, proficiency in coming up with different ideas. Cross-cultural competency, computational thinking. New media literacy, which is essentially what we're doing now. Being transdisciplinary, design mindset, cognitive load management, and virtual collaboration, which is again another sort of podcast skill that we're learning. So, I think what this tells me anyway, and I'd like to get your view on this is, the future. I'm not going to throw out STEM. I think science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are super central to the future of work. And if you want to ensure that you have a job, it's very important to maybe base a skill set in one of those. But if you just can't make it for whatever reason, or college is not possible, I think these sorts of skills, they don't necessarily demand a college degree. I think a lot of these skills demand access to the internet, hunger and a desire to understand about the world around you. And what's really cool about these particular skills is that if you're a good futurist, you probably have these skills already. I don't know if you picked up on that.
No, man, I love that you picked this topic because, like I said, my phys biz is very similar to this, and we came up with this completely separately, which is pretty funny. So I love how the Business Insider article that you listed and you're going to put in the notes, it lists the traits that will be like important for the next few years, and they're all things that make us inherently human as well, as opposed to artificial intelligence, such as our social skills. I love the fact that creativity is listed all over this, like the idea of us having to be creative minds, and I think that's something that will be becoming like more important more and more as as we as humans have to differentiate ourselves from artificial intelligence. We have the ability to be extremely creative and think of things that no one's thought of before, and that reminds me of a quote that a famous computer scientist basically said was like, the smartest computer I ever created was my son. Because our brains are still the most complicated computers that have ever been in existence, and I think will continue to be for a while. So I mean, you tell me, man. What do you think is the idea? What's next with AI?
Yeah. Well, in some ways, it's not even so much, right? We know what's next for AI, right? We know that AI is going to gobble up a lot of the base level skills that we have been getting good at, and this is blue collar, white collar, doesn't matter. And this is stuff we've been talking about, right? The automation. We just saw there's the McDonald's, not only in Europe but now in North America is starting to automate their cashiers. There's automation all over your grocery stores, autonomous cars. And I was actually having this discussion on Facebook with a friend of mine who's a trucker. He drives trucks. And we were sort of lamenting on the Tesla trucks are coming here, and I started thinking, because I looked at these skill sets, and I'm like, what if trucking actually changed? So instead of you actually driving the truck, what you were like a logistics management officer. So you could take care more of your customers. You were paying attention more to the load plans. You're doing the human aspects, and that's literally what these skill sets are talking about. And I'm going to put other noted internet skill sets that I find. I found a Ford article. One was perspective taking, which is something that I think was already there. Pain spotting, being able to understand where's the pain happening in business. Connecting the dots. Interviewing actually is one, something that we do on this podcast as well. Storytelling, and I think you're right. A lot of these skills are about embedding the human aspect into work, right? This is something that AI will not be able to do in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 30, 40 years. Maybe AI, it will take a long time for it to get there. So to me, the creativity of work is about having the ability to work with the ideas that you see, to work with the people that you can interact with, and to also bridge all the complex nature of whether it's business, technology, an industry, space, whatever you are doing, and be able to through a cross-disciplinary sort of level, be able to connect all the dots. So I think to me, you're absolutely right. Let's put the human back into work. Let's bring people closer together, and I think let's like that trucking analogy, right? We don't have to just sit there like an automaton and hold the wheel, anymore, and go forward, and that's all we're concentrating on. As far as I'm concerned, my buddy with the trucking issue, he could be sitting in the back, he could be coordinating his runs, he could be contacting his customers, he could be ensuring, maybe doing the next logistics run as he's picking up other stuff and dropping in modules. So it's actually, I think it'll be even a more satisfying job, because he's not an automaton anymore. He can actually start to be that much more creative, with his jobs and with the people that he works with.
Well, I like that. I think that you're right. I think that the next stage, because if you look at this in stages, I think the next stage is that artificial intelligence will allow us to focus more on the complex tasks. And that's something that you were talking about, is that in the next 4 to 5 years, the thing that will still be the most desirable is complex problem solving. That's going to be the highest importance. And so, we're going to be getting rid of these, autonomous tasks and things like that, where we won't need to be doing them. We'll have something that will do that, and we'll focus on, whatever that will be. And I've heard about, truckers, going and doing something different, because our transportation industry is going to vastly change. But I also think that, there's some things that we can look at and say, even as we progress through these different levels of automation, first taking over blue collar jobs, then other jobs and things like that, I think we can look at the fact that there are some jobs that will never, ever be taken by robots. I mean, think about politics. I don't think we will ever have robot politicians, because when it comes to a decision where it could impact life and death, just like what we're talking about now with autonomous vehicles, if the robot has to make the decision whether to hit a group of children or an old person, when it comes to those types of decisions, I think they should be left to humans, because that's something we can't give to a robot. Someone has to be responsible. That's human nature. So, I mean, I think you're right. In the next 4 to 5 years, we have this, taking of these menial tasks by robots. But what do you think about 20 years from now, 50? I mean, will there ever be something that robots will be able to do that we can't, or that we can and they can't do?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I think, and going back to what I've been saying, it's hard. In some ways, I think we need to look at what we've been doing for the past, 100, 150 years since we forced ourselves to work, right? It's only been the past really 100 years that people have moved away from the agrarian, living on the farm, doing menial tasks, and since the start of the revolution, or the industrial revolution, kind of like going back to Adam Smith and talking about how they made the pin. There's all 18 different ways in order to make a little tiny pin. which means there's like 4 or 5 or 6 or 10 people doing that, right? And we were breaking it down. So in some ways, we were robots. You had all these people doing these very menial tasks, and it meant for a very non-creative, a non-humanistic way of connecting with people. And I think what's really important about these skill sets that we're talking about that we're going to need, we're actually not because we're getting rid of the robots in us, and we're actually becoming more human, which means there's going to be a lot more jobs involving human touch. There's going to be a lot more jobs involving taking care of our fellow humans, and connecting with people and understanding their issues. In some ways, I think it could be a great equalizer to settle down society and to find the suicide victim or the disabled person who needs help, or someone who in the community where they're old or they're having trouble, finding the people before they reach those cracks and they fall through. So I think it's an exciting thing to think about, that we are not going to be robots ourselves anymore by actually having robots take over our menial jobs, and we can start to connect better with our fellow humans. So I'm actually excited for this, and I think this puts a positive spin on the whole AI eating up all our jobs story. Okay, so for Paleo Futures, we went with another futurist, if you will. His name is Herman Kahn, and he is not the typical futurist, by any stretch of the imagination, because he's not purely doing futures. He really was just a prominent thinker, of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. So Herman Kahn, he was the founder of the Hudson Institute. He's one of the preeminent futurist of the the latter 20th century. He really was less of a futurist. He's really more of a military strategist, right, and systems theorist. And we've talked about systems on the podcast itself or before. And so he worked at the Rand Corporation, which was a very prominent think tank, at post World War II, and he was known for analyzing the consequences of nuclear war. And so he was actually super famous. So similar to Marshall McLuhan, who we've done Paleo Futures on, he was kind of a known commodity and known intellectual during the 60s. And he was kind of so known as this super smart guy talking about the possibility of nuclear war during the Cold War, that he was actually he was the inspiration for a title character in Dr. Strangelove, which was pretty cool. So a little bit, yeah. I mean, a little bit of background in him. So he's from New Jersey. He attended UCLA, majored in physics. He went to Caltech, and he ended up actually dropping out of Caltech. But he did receive a Master of Science, and so he joined the Rand Corporation after that. His friend who had invented the neutron bomb, and he had like a lot of crazy friends. He had this guy, Samuel Cohen, who invented the neutron bomb. He was also friends with Edward Teller, John von Neumann, who's considered to be one of the smartest guys, ever. And he started his work at the Rand Corporation, and this was really kind of the first first real think tank, right? And the Rand Corporation, it was really interconnected with the Air Force. The Air Force was in charge of all the ICBMs, and they were in charge of sort of strategic thinking. So this is when they really started to do and use things like game theory and scenario planning to ideate on what would happen if a nuclear attack happened. And keep in mind, this is actually, when you think about it, when you think about warfare, but when you really think about nuclear warfare, there's a lot of stuff happening here, because game theory is very important here. I don't know if you have an idea of game theory, but it's a mathematical model that is all about conflict and cooperation. But also, nuclear theory is about the fallout and the ability to, is it tenable to have a thermonuclear war? And so a lot of his theories, spoke on this, spoke on the unthinkable, is and how we could win, quote unquote. And he believed actually that we could win. So he was really based as a nuclear but a military strategist. He developed a lot of the ideas on thinking about the unthinkable and on escalation, what it takes for America to go to war or not go to war. And in the meantime, because he was this sort of ideator type of character, and he worked in a think tank, eventually heading his own the Hudson Institute. He worked with a lot of other kind of known futurists of the day, and came out with predictions such as application of lasers, high strength structural materials, new airborne vehicles, and all sorts of stuff. He tried to do some predictions on economics, which I think he wasn't as good in terms of military, because he predicted by the year 2000 U.S. GDP would rise from the 65 level of $3,500 to 10,000. Well, I think we're 3 times above that, and but he did see, he didn't see the end of the USSR, but he did see the 8 intermediate powers: Japan, Germany, France, China, United Kingdom, India, Italy, and Canada as being major superpowers. And a lot of the other stuff were right on. The population exploding to 6.47 billion. People be throwing away inexpensive appliances and things like that. Productivity rising, and even culturally, he saw that culture was becoming, more human, more sensory, having the ability to connect with people like that. So, I think he's not who I think people think of when they think of futurists. Honestly, I don't think even people even remember who this guy is. And of course, that's why I love to bring up people like this in Paleo Futures, because I like to shine a little bit of light on thinkers like this. But I don't think he's to be missed, because he was almost the prototype for the thinkers that we have currently in think tanks that are trying to come up with innovative ways, whether it's warfare, whether it's feeding the world, whether it is getting to space. It's cool and interesting to bring thought leaders like this to light.
Well, I like him because I think that you're right. He was in the Rand Corporation, but he served during several administrations. I think that if we look back at somebody who has look at their background to see how they evolved as a futurist. So he was a military guy. But he served in a non-combat position during World War II in the Pacific. So he never really saw combat. But I think that kind of led to his idea of game theory, because that's kind of how the military teaches people, is to think about strategy. And that's something that they've ingrained in their people for hundreds of years, is to think about strategy. And so when he was looking at nuclear war, he was thinking about the strategy and how do we survive, and if one thing that fascinated me when I was reading about him was that he was working during the Eisenhower administration, and their policy during the 1950s, the Eisenhower administration's policy, was to launch nuclear bombs on the Soviets under any provocation. So can you believe that? If it had stayed that way, so he encouraged them and he helped develop their thought patterns of future administrations so that to stay away from that. But if it had stayed that way, can you imagine we would have launched nukes during the Cuban crisis? There's all sorts of things that that could have happened. If he hadn't worked to say, hey, look, this is something survivable and something that we should work against. So he had his attractors and detractors. I think he said that in order for deterrence to succeed, the Soviet Union had to be convinced that the United States had second strike capability, which would leave the Politburo in Moscow in no doubt that even a perfectly coordinated massive attack would guarantee a measure of retaliation that would leave them devastated as well. Now, that was, from what I understand, that was not real. But it was, we made the Soviets think that, and he came up with that idea. I think it's, if we look, unfortunately, he only lived to be about 61 or 62. But, he lived during, the Cold War. He lived during Vietnam. He talked about Vietnam, and he actually, I think this is one place where he was wrong, but then he even advocated for a solution. So he talked about Vietnam, and he said that we should always have a strong response and, go in there and, be really aggressive. But then he also advocated for an exit strategy. So if things didn't go our way, which, supposedly he coined the phrase Vietnamization, which was, basically peace by letting Vietnam become Vietnamese as opposed to, not American. One thing that I think that really makes him a futurist too is like what you were talking about, that he focused on other things besides war and nuclear war. He talked about how South Korea he believed they were going to become one of the highest GDPs in the world. And, he said that, he wrote a book about the next 200 years where he wrote about the economy in 2176. So, I mean, I think, he was a man that we tie a lot with nuclearization and the Rand Corporation, but I think he had other thoughts. And when the Cold War was winding down, like in the late 70s, early 80s, he was able to talk about things that I think that, what we think of as modern futurist thoughts. And it's sad that we lost him so early, because I bet you he would have had so many more thoughts and things to put out there. And then unfortunately he passed away at I think at a young age.
I agree. And you're right. He started at Rand, but then he created the Hudson Institute, and by this time he had already had a celebrity as an intellectual. And so in the 70s, he actually started to connect with other prominent futurists. So, there's a sociologist named Daniel Bell. He's a very well-known futurist. He befriended Ralph Ellison from the Invisible Man fame. And then he was right there in the thick of it with people like Paul Ehrlich, who wrote The Population Bomb in 1968. He was there speaking with the Club of Rome, Limits to Growth, 1972. So, if anything, he may have even been a catalyst to what modern futures is. So, maybe he wasn't the prototypical futurist that we'd put him into that category now. But if anything, he was the prototype, if you will. He was a gregarious guy. Apparently he was really funny. He was he liked to connect with people. He liked to have fun, but he was obviously serious about about humanity and about understanding where humanity could go. So, I think you're right. We lost a guy maybe in a little bit too early, but I'm glad we had him, and I'm glad we had a prototype that good futurists can model themselves after.
Hey, Chris, I thought we should be a little bit different in announcing our biz today. Okay. So, I would like to read this poem I wrote about as our disclaimer.
All right. Yeah, we're getting poetic. This is nice.
It's a haiku. So if you're ready for it, I'll dub some music in afterwards when I'm editing this.
Cool.
All right. So here we go. For your losses, we are not responsible. You control your mind.
Wow, that's just amazing. Like, that was pretty good. Yeah, that's great.
I know. Sorry, we have to make it funny somehow, guys. We do this every week. So, so in other words, I want to tell people, listen to what we have to say, but make your own opinions, people. So, as we noted in Chris's present future, the workplace is changing. While Chris is often the optimist, you can guess how I view this issue. Dun, dun, dun. All right, so according to one prominent futurist, that's a Miss Faith Popcorn. Literally, her last name is Popcorn, I know. By the end of the year, this being 2017, we are going to be more stressed out, emotional, working 24 hours a day, freelancing, and are on smart drugs to increase our productivity. So Chris has stated what he believes will be the future work skills that we will need in the next few years. However, when we imagine a world in the next 15 to 20 years, which is what I'm going to focus on, one with artificial intelligence increasingly taking not only the jobs of the factory workers, but the jobs of the white-collar workers as well, we have to imagine that work itself is going to vastly change. So indeed, like many prominent futurists believe that eventually we will get to a point where work will cease to exist and the human mind will be left open to creativity alone. Now, this does scare several futurists, as some experts believe that this is rapidly approaching and will impact us during the millennial generation's work life. This is why I'm bringing this up during our FizzBiz segment. We need to start contemplating an ever-disruptive workplace for the millennial and the generations that will come afterwards, as this could essentially mean the end of work, which is something Chris and I have talked about a lot. And this could eventually put us all out of a job, making the millennials the last generation to be fully employed. So I'm bringing this up. Yeah.
We're millennials, man. Like, geez, we've got a really dire view here.
Yeah. So I'm bringing it up in FizzBiz because this is something that you and I talk about a lot, obviously. But in this one instance, I'm not going to be completely all doom and gloom here. Because I honestly see a world where the future of work will change to adapt to technologies and be one in which new types of jobs will come into existence. Jobs like we were talking about. These are jobs in which I think our listeners should pay attention to, as these are the jobs and the skills that I believe will be needed in the future, and that I believe we should also be pivoting towards and are teaching to our children to achieve. According to Future Inc., a report by Deloitte Australia, harnessing diversity and global mobility will be increasingly important to business success, that as individuals we will need to be ready and willing to adapt to changing circumstances and learn new skills. We are reaching a point where business transformation will be never-ending, and we will have to be willing to adapt as our working environments are changing. According to another report, currently 33% of the American workforce is freelance, and we can expect that to rise to 50% by 2020. What this means is that we will be required to be more entrepreneurial and learn skills that we may not yet have, such as the skills that Chris and I were talking about, creativity, and things like that. This doesn't mean that we will need to all work in tech, though, but it does mean that our jobs may be more heavily affected by tech than currently exists. New skills will be acquired such as transitionists, expansionists, maximizers, philosophers, and more. New jobs will come into being, and this is where you should really start to think in an entrepreneurial way about jobs and businesses that will exist in the future. Jobs such as smart home installers, VR designers, freelance professors, urban farmers, nanomedics, 3D printing engineers, and more. So I'm going to bring you in on this, Chris, because, what other types of jobs and skills do you think that we will need to learn and that will be created in the next 15 to 20 years?
Right. So, obviously anybody who can work with large sums of information and or new ways of extracting that information, right? And information, I'm not just talking about Excel, if you're a accountant or Tableau or R if you're a data scientist, or QuickBooks or whatever the heck you're using, whatever the QuickBooks of the 2030 or 2040 is going to do. I'm talking about the ability to extract information from media sources as well, whether it's video, VR, AR. You're going to have to be able to deal with information. We're in the information economy now. Eventually the algorithm economy, and so you're going to need to know how to steward that information as best as you can. And information is going to be ubiquitous in every single industry. So right now, computers are gobbling up cars. So you're going to have to understand the information coming in and out of your car when you're an auto mechanic. The medical industry is. We've moved over to electronic medical records, and we're going to be using a Watson-like AI platform that's going to enable us to be able to not only make really great diagnoses, but also help us engineer new products, drugs, and ways of treatment. So it really doesn't matter. I think information is going to be super important to know how to work with, and it might not be necessarily you doing the nitty gritty work of going into a app or platform and sitting on your computer and doing it. That may be automated, and you may just be doing a query. And we see this currently happening with the emergence of chatbots in terms of artificial intelligence. That all you have to do is just say a question or a query, and something will be put out. So I think knowing how to deal with information and how to extract it, and then the next thing I think is also how to explain that information in a truly multidisciplinary way. So being able to connect a lot of complex ideas and bring them together. And then I think another skill is something that we all have, and this is the tangible skill of human connection. If AI goes ahead and gobbles up a lot of our menial tasks. This means that we can actually start paying very close attention to what really makes us separate from many of the animals in the animal community, and that's human nature, the ability to connect with people and have empathy and to common touch, and then also creativity. There may be an explosion of new types of art and music just because the menial task of music making, and that you could see combined orchestras with both AI and human interactions in order to create the new sounds of 2045 or something like that. So I'm not a pessimist when it comes to the future of work. What I think though is that we need to be aware that the jobs are going to change. And so all of these, we're not prepared. I don't think we're currently preparing for this new era as of right now. But if you and I can give voice to it, I think it'd be a big help to folks not only who listen to the podcast, but maybe get people thinking outside of the futuristic realms as well.
Yeah, well, that's something we need to talk to our listeners and say, hey, you guys need to be talking to your friends about this and seeing, if your industry, and that's why this is on FizzBiz, because if your industry is going to be the one that's affected, such as your trucker friend, the automotive industry is going to be widely affected by this, what steps can you take in order to combat this, to learn new skills, to be willing to adapt? I mean, they're talking about the coal miners right now in West Virginia and Virginia, and saying that, well, hey, you know what? They should, there's an industry actually out there that's the wind turbines. They're saying, hey, we'll train you to come in and work on our wind turbines, coal miners of West Virginia and Virginia, so that you can get a job and you're not left behind by this transforming economy.
Or solar installation, or tidal, or any of the other. We're switching energy for energy. I think that's absolutely right. We can't just leave people in the cold. I think what companies have to do, like a McDonald's when they automate their front staff, is try to figure out how are we going to take our staff members and not leave them out in the cold, but to develop them to be even better employees. Like, one thing I think about the automation, I just put up a thing on our Facebook, an automated pizzeria, and I'm wondering, what if, like, we just, instead of having 5 or 6 people working at the pizzeria, it's completely automated. But what that means is that each and every one of those people can actually operate a pizzeria, like, in the town in a different place. So they're managing their own pizzeria, and they do everything. They do the logistics, they do the finance and accounting, and so in some ways it makes for a more creative job.
Well, and that's something maybe that managers, if you're a manager and you're a listener to this show, is you have that discussion with your employee. What's your transformation plan? Where you're going to be in the next 5, 10, 15 years, and not have the employee be concerned about, like, oh, I'm going to be here, sir. No, your plan should be, if this job is scheduled to not exist in the next 5 years, well, what skills can we teach you so that you can go on and become management, or go on and be an engineer, or go on and do these things, these skills that are required, and that we know you, so we know you're a hard worker, and keeping your employee, as opposed to all of these different things. I'm concerned about this freelance economy, because when all of these freelancers, I'm like, I just, that's the one thing millennials get a lot of flack for, is that they're not very committed to their industries and organizations. Well, it's not the old days of the 50s where companies took care of their employees as long as they worked there. It's changing. And, unfortunately, I think we're losing that human aspect of connectivity, and that, the managers aren't caring as much anymore about their employees. So, I mean, I'm a pessimist for some reasons, and that's one of them. But I mean, here's something that's kind of off the cusp, Chris. Do you think there are any jobs really that are safe from automation that that robots will not take our jobs for? I mean, I know we mentioned politicians, but I mean, do you think anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I think one that I do on my off hours. So I'm a licensed massage therapist, and the fine touch of massage therapy, that is, it's taken me 6,500 hours to learn that fine touch, and I think robotics is pretty far off from the ability to manipulate the human body like that. So I think anything that requires fine human touch, I think anything that requires not only human touch but also human interaction is very important. So therapists or caregivers, hospice workers, things along these lines. Of course, obviously creativity. I mean, I think right now AI is already creating music and whatnot, but there's a tangible quality when you hear a guitar note or a cool rapper putting together certain words and saying it at a certain tempo and stuff. There's certain things you can't take away from the human experience, that transcendence, right? So
Talking about empathy.
Right. Well, empathy and connection and the ability to take all your personal experience and your doubt and your fear and your optimism and everything and package it into a lot of things, whether it's caring for someone or being the lead singer of some rock band somewhere. So I think robots, they're not going to gobble everything up, and I don't think we have to run for the hills and completely recreate our society around this. But we should be doing exactly what we're doing right now, which is, and corporations should as well. How do we develop skills for the future? How do we ensure that people are aware that their certain jobs may go away, and in 5 or 10 years' time, what are the skills that we can get them to learn so they can be better employees, so they can usher us into this new era? So yes, to me too, if this is FizzBiz, I would want to invest in companies that are working on this transformation type of workplace and are trying to seek to keep their people employed by any means necessary, by ensuring that they're getting the right skills to lead their company, not only through the 21st century, but 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th.
I mean, I agree. I think empathy is very important. And the reason I brought up empathy is because I agree with you that massage therapy, it has an empathetic point of view to it as well, because even though you're massaging someone, it's how someone reacts to your touch that makes a big difference in how I think a lot of people view a massage. So, I mean, in the end, I think just to end this segment, I think that we need to say that we need to start seeing where our jobs could end, coming up with transition plans, either working with your manager or if you're the head of a company, seeing where you can do this, investing in companies that are showing this kind of intelligence and forethought to plan for this. And I think I'll leave our listeners with the thought. Think about your job and really look to see, if it could be replaced in the next 5-10 years plus, and see how you can go about being a step ahead of your replacement, of learning new skills, of what you can do and be more entrepreneurial about it. You can't get siloed, because the pace of transformation is only accelerating. So we have to be willing and able to plan for this. And this is something that I hope will be taught eventually in schools, that the adaptability. So that's the end of it.
Okay, great. So for the interview segment today, we have Tom Lombardo. He's a PhD, and he's the executive director of the Center for Future Consciousness, the director of the Wisdom Page, the managing editor of Wisdom and the Future, and professor emeritus and retired faculty chair of the Psychology, Philosophy, and the Future of Rio Salado College. Dr. Lombardo is also an awarded fellow and executive board member of the World Future Studies Federation, a national and internationally recognized researcher, writer, speaker. He's published 6 books, over 50 articles on a number of topics to include the history of science and philosophical thought, wisdom, character virtues, and the future of education, future consciousness, and contemporary futurist thought, science fiction as mythology of the future, and the future evolution of consciousness and mind. Geez, Tom, you are a busy guy. Thanks for joining. Take your time out of your busy schedule to come and join the podcast.
Thank you too, Chris. And this morning I felt a bit crazy because all those things were circling around in my mind at the same time. While I'm walking around the park, I got to do this and I got to do this, and there's this project and that project. So, as Confucius said, don't wish too hard for your heart's desire, where you end up getting what you want, and then you realize how big of a burden it is to carry the whole damn thing. Yeah. So,
Well, I'm hoping this really gets you. If anything, this gets us what we want, right? Because when we started to think about who we wanted on the show, we wanted folks just like you. And the reason why is that Future studies is steeped in technology, steeped in economics, is steeped in science. And I know you do write on these, but it's really great to kind of hear about learning about the inner dimensions of humanity, and the soul. It's kind of the crosshairs of
Hmm.
what you cover. So tell me, why study consciousness when you're a futurist?
Well, because I came into the study of the future through psychology and philosophy. My degrees were not was not in future studies. My degrees were in psych and philosophy, and I was always interested in the topics of consciousness, the relationship of the mind and the brain, how consciousness and the mind could evolve in the future. I have a background, a reading background, an intense interest in science fiction. And even though people will stereotype science fiction as about the future of science and technology, there's tons of science fiction that deals with the future evolution of humans, the next step in humans, super intelligence, super consciousness. And probably 19 other things woven together there. One I will mention, though, that I think is important is that there's lots of people now and in the past who have believed that as science and technology continues to develop, somehow or other, that is going to solve all of our problems. But we keep making better gadgets and bigger bombs and more sophisticated technologies, but we don't seem to be getting along any better. And there's lots of people who feel very depressed and miserable about the state of affairs of the world. And so, what is it that we're missing? And to me, it seems like what we're missing is that our mental and conscious capacities, including our ethical capacities, have not sufficiently evolved to create that utopian or better world. And so I think the key to the future is not so much evolving better and better technologies, because we continually do that very well, but rather to develop our conscious minds in ways that so far have not been really developed. Some people would say that, our mental abilities aren't staying parallel with our technological abilities. And that's not to poo poo technology, because I think technology in lots of ways can help to facilitate our conscious evolution. But we have to look at our conscious minds as the center of gravity, and we have to be wise cyborgs and mentally evolved cyborgs, because right now we're rather shallow cyborgs
Yeah.
in lots of ways.
No, for sure. I mean,
Sure.
and this actually goes right into some of the pieces that you write on the wisdom of future
Right.
consciousness, right? So I'm quoting here: future consciousness is part of our general awareness of time, our temporal consciousness of past, present, and future. It's the human capacity to have thoughts, feelings, and goals about the future. It's the total integrative set of psychological abilities, processes, and experiences humans use in understanding and dealing with the future. Future consciousness covers everything in human psychology that pertains to the future. So, how much does this internal work when we're thinking about the future go hand in hand with our external thoughts when we're trying to understand where the future is going to go?
Well, first of all, our consciousness is interfacing with that world out there. So, right now, what you were calling my inner consciousness, well, my inner consciousness, which includes my thoughts, images, emotions, I'm expressing it and interfacing with you two, both of whom are conscious as well. And so, what I bring to the world is I'm bringing to the world what my conscious mind is able to do and how it organizes its perceptions and organizes its thoughts and interfaces with that world out there. Consciousness reaches out into the world. Consciousness is our connection with the world. So if I develop and strengthen my consciousness and my conscious self, that's going to have a big impact and show up in terms of how I interact with the world and how I deal with the world. If I come at the world with fear and anxiety and a closed minded attitude or change or possibilities, then that's going to have one kind of an impact out there in the world and one kind of an impact on the future. So what's in here, what's up here, is definitely of central significance in how what happens out there transpires. And again, like, this is the center of gravity in here. This is the coordinating system. It's a conscious, personalized system. And when I use the expression future consciousness, I'm referring to all of those mental capacities that we have in dealing with the future. So, for example, if I come at the future with realistic hope and self-efficacy and optimism, which are all qualities of future consciousness, positive future consciousness, enhanced future consciousness, then that has an impact upon how my life is going to go and the people around me, how their lives is going to go. Because in this case here, optimism versus pessimism are to some degree self-fulfilling prophecies. The conscious mind, and in particular the conscious mind's capacity to deal with the future, is definitely going to have an effect upon the way the future of the world transpires, including other people, countries, technologies, etc. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but I have a lot of thoughts up in my conscious head, so to speak.
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. So I had a question for you too. So I've read some of your articles. So in your Psychology in the Future article, you wrote, and I quote, "Additionally, evolution appears to be accelerating with higher, more complex levels of reality in the hierarchical structure, exhibiting progressively quicker rates of transformation." Can you expound on that? So you're saying that we only have this pessimistic and optimistic view, but it's accelerating. And you touched on that in the beginning. So how fast is this process going? Is there a maximum velocity?
I don't know if there's a maximum velocity. What I was getting at in that section that you read is that it looks as if fundamental transformations in the evolutionary history of the universe are occurring quicker and quicker. Kurzweil in his books has a graph up showing that. And there's a significant consensus that evolution, the rate of evolution, is speeding up. And that humans with highly advanced minds, and even if they don't look that highly advanced, they are, coupled together with technology and culture, is speeding up the process of change even more.
This is the hyper culture that you, I think, mentioned too.
Yeah,
in some of your writings
hyperculture is that guy's notion, whatever his name is. But basically, what I'm talking about is the acceleration of the evolutionary process. Now, how does that happen? It happens because evolution is not a single process. Rather, evolution is a series of different types of processes that come into play as the universe has gotten more complex. So, as Walter Truett Anderson said, evolution isn't what it used to be, meaning that there are new processes that come into play in the history of the universe that are new evolutionary mechanisms and activities for generating evolution and actually speed it up. Now, I'll make this very specific and concrete in talking about us. When we act, when we do things, we conceptualize goals, have purposes, think things out to different degrees, draw upon our learning, our memory, and try to figure out what the best thing is to do in different circumstances. So instead of the process of change in humans at their psychological level simply being random trial and error leading to a natural selection, we actually engage in purposeful evolution. So evolution within us has acquired this additional power above and beyond biological evolution, which was random variation, natural selection, so that we are engaging now in purposeful evolution. And we have been engaging in purposeful evolution ever since we started to think and plan out and anticipate and try to guide the process of flow. And that speeds things up. And Kurzweil's argument regarding technology is that technology, in fact, which is an instrument of humans, speeds up the process of evolution as well, too. So we are thinking creatures with purposes who learn, acquire information, direct the flow, and use gadgetry added on to all of that to speed up the process of evolution. And so we have been messing with nature and trying to guide and manipulate it, including trying to guide and manipulate ourselves for thousands, if not millions of years. So that's another long answer to your question, but it's a good question. Yeah. I don't know if I quite answered what you were asking.
No, I mean, I think you did. I mean, and this is really perfect because this goes into other parts of your writing. It seems like all these different questions and answers goes right into another part, which is what I really enjoy about doing these interviews.
Yeah.
One thing I read, at least maybe read into this, is this sort of the dual nature of both the mind, our conscious mind, and what we want to do versus the matter world. So I think you put it as the mind matter dualism, right? So people being both comfortable and uncomfortable with comfort, and you see this right in the present, right? You'll see a religious article sandwiched right next to us finding a new exoplanet, right? You see the inability for us to work with technology and the Luddite nature, and then right next to it, you see a brand new technology that's going to completely change us, and it's all on the same CNN website.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the dreams and fears of science and technology when it comes to trying, to push this hyper, culture forward?
Okay. Yes. We have both dreams and fears about the future, and they're both legitimate because there are no guarantees about the future. There are no guarantees as far as whether or not the efforts psychologically, socially, technologically that we engage in are going to work for the better, or they're going to work against us or have negative consequences. And usually there turns out to be a mixed bag. So evolution itself is risky business. There's lots of trial and error in it. And it seems to me that humanity engages in lots of trial and error, and lots of times the things we try out don't seem to pan out the way that we would hope they would pan out. You can't become overpowered by fear, though. There's a certain approach to the future where people think the future's laid out, there's a direction to it, it's God's plan, blah, 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 and we're just going to go ahead and go with the flow. But that's not the way reality is. The kind of reality we live in, we're creating the future, and the future is uncertain, and things could go bad or things can go better. And that's, of course, scary. One of the character virtues that we need with respect to the future is courage, realistic courage. And that doesn't mean to be Pollyannish or to think that everything's going to go great, but you need to approach the future with a sense of hope, realizing, of course, that things could go wrong. Now, another thing that you said in your comments there was that I look on news feeds, I look on Google, and I see I see this incredible mixture of different angles and perspectives on things. And William Gibson, a science fiction writer, said that the future is not evenly distributed. So you will see people who are very resistant to change or development and feel as if the answer was figured out thousands of years ago, and I don't want to hear anything new. And you will see people who are more forward or progressive looking and will think, well, what you believe in is thousands of years old. It's outdated, and it's the 1920s or it's 2000 BC that you think, and that's how you think. And so this is something that's gone on in history since the beginnings of recorded history. There are people who want to preserve the status quo. There's people who want to have the good old days, and there's people that try to push forward and are innovative. Okay? There's something to be said for the way things were because there's a sense of security in it. But if you don't grow, you eventually die. So ultimately, there is no security in it. On the other hand, if you want to push forward, if you want to develop, then there's, of course, risks in it. And so the development of future consciousness, for example, is developing your capacities for creating and dealing with the future as best as possible to maximize the chances of producing better results, good results, ethical results, well-being with humanity, as opposed to creating messes or difficulties. But in the final analysis, you don't have any guarantees on this. There's no guarantees. I personally, the first thing you had said there about dualism in the mind and the body, I'm not a dualist. I think the mind, our conscious minds are expressions, if that's the right word, of our bodies. Another way to say it is we have conscious bodies. I see your body. I see Frank's body over there. We have conscious bodies. Our bodies are very strange and interesting things, that they have minds and we have minds, and that we think with them, and that we're conscious of the world with them. So I don't know if I'm a dualist, or I don't think I'm a dualist. Okay, so
well, let me ask you.
Responding to different pieces of that and what you were saying.
Sure.
Yeah.
And let me ask you, Tom. This is a question that I have. I know you've spoken on ethics a lot. You've talked about the Eastern idea of ethics, the Western idea of ethics. But my question for you, being in this futurist thought, is the future of consciousness ethical?
I think ethics is figuring out what the best way to live is. And the best way to live is to utilize our most excellent and advanced capacities. And that's heightening future consciousness and wisdom. I think that the preferable future for the evolution of the conscious mind is by definition ethical. I'm using ethical in a broad sense to refer to defining what is best or preferable in life. And for example, things like optimism, courage, self-responsibility, discipline, love and compassion, all those virtues benefit humans and in fact enhance our cognitive capacities and our mental capacities. So I think when we ask the question, and I would use Olaf Stapleton, the great science fiction philosopher writer, as an example of this, that the future evolution of conscious minds is going to involve an ethical dimension necessarily, because that's part of what the evolution of consciousness has to be all about how to get the best out of us, both individually and collectively.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that goes right into a quote that I that you had written in one of your papers. I mean, it was from William James, and the quote was, "A great many people think that they are thinking when they're just merely rearranging their prejudices," right? And yes. I think, and I've spoken on this. We spoke to Dr. Andy Hines at the University of Houston Futures Program. Yeah. And I told him this story about when I was getting my MS in futures, I had we had one of these classes where we were thinking about thinking, right? And I know you've written on that,
Right.
and I think this is a very important topic for any futurists out there to think about thinking, and that quote is very perfect. And my idea, or at least what I pulled from the landscape that is out there, is I saw this Bruce Lee video, and Bruce Lee was talking about what water was. He said, when water is put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. When you boil it, water becomes air. When you put it at a freezing, it becomes an ice tray. Water becomes whatever is in front of it. And what I told the class was, or at least what I was trying to explain, was that we have to, as futurists, when we're thinking about things, we have to become, essentially what that future could possibly be, and we have to remove any prejudice we have in front of it. We have to be amorphous in our thought. And so I was just wondering if you had a comment on, because you've written on it. What should futurists think about when it comes to their thinking?
Yes, right. Well, you said a bunch of things again there, Chris. Okay, so let me unpack them. The James quote. The James quote is identifying the fact that we all have a set of perspectives and frameworks and beliefs, and to really think has to involve standing back from and questioning those perspectives, beliefs, and frameworks, not just juggling them around, so that when somebody is thinking to themselves or out loud, even like right now, I don't simply want to just throw up a collection of things that I've already thought. I want to think about those things that I have thought and I believe, and question and maybe put a different angle or spin on them. There's a definition of critical thinking, which is critical thinking is thinking about your thinking when you are thinking in order to make your thinking better. All right. Now, the amorphous part, the term amorphous you brought up there. I completely and utterly believe that you can't transcend, none of us can, all of our biases and perspectives. We are in the world from a point of view with a set of beliefs and perspectives that we develop through our lives. What we can do is we can call into question and examine and consider any or all of those perspectives at different times, and perhaps expand our frame of reference. But we're never going to get rid of having frames of reference. The best we can do is become more flexible and expansive in them. We'll never become amorphous. And maybe we don't really want to become amorphous, and that's another whole kettle of fish, which I won't even go into. So, for example, if you come at the world from a Western point of view, and so comes at it from an Eastern point of view, and you think in terms of linear either or logic, and that other person thinks in terms of both and yin-yang logic, the next step forward for each of you would be to be able to see how the other side conceptualizes it, sees the value in the other side, and somehow both sides can put the two things together, and then for both of them, they've expanded their framework. But they're never going to have a totally empty framework. In fact, to have a totally amorphous empty framework would be to have an empty head. Nothing in it. Okay. Yes. Right.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I'm totally down with that too. I understand that having having a framework to think about the future makes sense.
Make the framework, and the more complex and diverse you make it, the more you can encompass. When people talk about coming at the future, well, there's all different kinds of possibilities you could entertain when you think about the future, and part of the development of future consciousness is to get increasing flexibility and openness into your frames of reference, that is, have more of them, so that if someone says to you that I think it's conceivable that we could live indefinitely and be downloaded into robots or into computers and live as virtual realities, or you can even download ourselves into dolphins. You have to be able to thoughtfully consider that possibility. A lot of people, if they heard something like that, or to switch sexes whenever you wanted to, okay, they would just pull right back and not even open their mind to it. And that's being too closed off to the possibilities that lie ahead of us in the future, let alone the possibilities other people may entertain.
Well, Tom,
Sure.
and let me interrupt you there for a second.
Yeah, right.
You give your framework, I mean, maybe in a couple of sections of where you think the future of consciousness is going to go. I mean, I think you talked about it, what a lot of futurists talk about when they say, like, the end game is, downloading your consciousness into a robot. A lot of people talk about that. So tell me what your point of view is. What are the next stages of consciousness? And then maybe if that's your end point, then mention that.
All right. Okay. All right. One thing I think is this: our conscious selves, our sense of identity, right now is primordial, fragmented, and confused. We have very undeveloped selves and egos. Even though people who are Eastern often will say you need to transcend the ego, transcend the self, I think part of our problem is that our conscious selves, our sense of me, who I am, is very undeveloped. And that in the future, ideally, preferably, people will have conscious selves that are like that are to us as our conscious selves are to the selves of amoebas, who have very fuzzy wuzzy senses of a self. So we need to enhance our self-consciousness tremendously. That's what gets us into a lot of trouble, because we're conflicted, confused about who we are, what we want to do. We have insecurities. We haven't developed who we are. A second thing is that we have to be able to effectively coordinate and integrate with our information technology in such a way that we remain the masters of the technological systems, as opposed to being overpowered and losing ourselves within them. So I think that I believe we're already cyborgs. I think we just have to significantly enhance our capacity to interface and utilize technological apparatus. On the thing about whether we can download our conscious minds into a technological device, I think that that's a strong possibility. I think that it could be a very positive thing. I don't think we understand, though, what consciousness is yet, such that we can definitively say we can make a machine conscious and us being that consciousness in the machine or not. There's lots of people who say you can't do it, and there's people who say you can do it. But the fact of the matter is, I believe that no one really has a good, solid explanation of how biological bodies somehow manifest consciousness. So we can't say one way or the other whether that damn machine over there can become conscious or not.
So you're bringing up the concept of the soul.
Well, I don't use the word soul. Okay, I don't know what soul means. Lots of people say they believe that they have a soul, but then, well, what do you mean by the soul? You mean your sense of personal identity? Okay. Well, I can feel that, definitely. That's what I meant by the self. Okay. If I download whatever it is that I'm going to be downloading here into that machine, does that self, that conscious self, wake up in that new body, that silicon body, or that virtual reality body? Um, just as a recommendation, um, there's a science fiction writer out of Australia named Greg Egan, and he wrote a science fiction novel called Diaspora. And the first part of Diaspora is a very interesting speculative exploration of how you create a conscious mind within a computer, and a conscious mind that realizes itself within a virtual reality. It's a good exercise on your brain to try to follow through and listen to his writing. So, one thing I definitely think, no question about it, is that we are not the end of evolution. We are a transition state, and so there is going to be things after us. And will those more evolved conscious minds be embodied in, at least partially embodied in machines, exist in virtual reality? Will we network our biological, technological bodies together into bigger collective minds? I see all those as possibilities too. But bottom line is that I do think that preferably we definitely need to become what people would call more wise and more ethical if we're really going to be something we would consider more evolved.
Do we think too that consciousness has other levels to go to as well? You know, one thing that I see, and you know, we're talking about this duality happening right now, right? Is we have these singularitarians, you know, for lack of a better word, that are saying we're going to upload our brains, we're all going to be, where consciousness is going to be ones and zeros embedded in some form of technology in the future, and just get ready for it. It's happening in 2045, and boom, right? But then actually right now there's an explosion, a current explosion in psychedelic studies, Kundalini yoga, breathing exercises. I did ayahuasca, a couple of years ago, and I've talked about this on the podcast, and I explored my mind in ways I'd never even thought was possible.
Yeah.
So is there a possible even bifurcation happening now too in humanity, where some of humanity is exploring both exponential, connections to the universe, the ones and zero connections that we're kind of giving rise to, versus the actual using the human brain to connect with the universe?
Definitely yes, and yes, and more. You don't have to assume that the future of humanity is a single species or a single track. We can diversify in various ways, and in fact, in that book I just mentioned, Diaspora, humanity diversifies along three different paths. One of which stays in a biological form and develops themselves morally, ethically, in a more, in quote, natural way. A second form downloads their conscious minds into robots, so we have humanity as robots. And then the third kind completely gives up the body and just downloads and creates their consciousness in a virtual reality and lives in a virtual reality where if they want to, they can manifest themselves in a nanotechnologically supported physical form, but their primary time, a primary fundamental mode of existence is in virtual reality. Now,
mind blown.
Yes, no, it's good. Diaspora is good. I'm saying read Diaspora. But okay, remember a thing I said a little bit ago, which I come back to frequently. We are beings that have the capacity to purposively evolve ourselves. And consequently, throughout our history, we have in numerous ways attempted to purposively evolve ourselves. One of the ways in which we have done that is through various types of religions and or meditative and spiritual practices. Another way we have done it is through technologies. Another way we are doing it is through biology, more and more so as time goes on. We try to do it in terms of psychology and psychotherapy, and we try to do it in terms of various mishmashes of spiritual, psychological, social. So that is of our very nature. That's what we are, that we continually experiment with how we can advance ourselves along as many different dimensions as possible. Now, if you're very holistic in your thinking, then you would probably say something like, all of those approaches have value. So how do I combine them together in different ways to get the best possible result? So I meditate, I take drugs, I read science fiction, I try to enhance my consciousness, and I hook my brain up to a computer at times, and God knows what the hell comes out of that. All right? And I'm just sort of scratching the surface, of course. If you go into virtual reality, then it's quite conceivable, and people worry about this, that individual conscious minds in a virtual reality will find ways to mesh, interweave together, so that individual distinctiveness also goes by the wayside, and we become like collective minds. There's a science fiction novel called, it's actually a series called The Weird Tetralogy by Rudy Rucker. Out of San Francisco. And Rudy Rucker is a PhD in mathematics, but he came up with this idea of the evolution of drugs, which has been ongoing in our history for thousands of years, whereby they came up with this drug that when you take it before you make love, what it does is it melts the two bodies together, so that the two people have this unified biological orgasm, right? And then when the drug wears off, they separate again. So that's another way in which things can go too. I think you did mention chemistry.
Yeah.
So yeah, obviously there's lots of different approaches to purposeful evolution. What I'm suggesting, though, again, is that they are all examples of purposeful evolution, because in all cases, we think about it, we try things out intentionally, we set goals, we gather information together, and we try to guide our future as opposed to just simply go with the flow. Even those people who say go with the flow, they thought that was a good idea, so that was intentional too. Go out and take a walk in the park if that's going with the flow. But that's intentional. That's purposeful. Yeah.
Sure.
So they're not necessarily incompatible. They can be in various ways woven together.
Sure. And, and one thing that I think I heard a little bit there was the impact of not only where we're going, but what we were, which is and where we came from, right? You were kind of giving voice to one reason that humanity is always looking for something, and one tool that they used was religion,
right,
and myth. So,
right,
how important is myth, mythology and myth thinking when it comes to trying to understand about the future?
It's incredibly important, because that is a primordial mode of understanding in the conscious mind. By that I mean that we are very much inclined to resonate with stories and narratives. Stories and narratives move us more so than abstract theories and formula do. So if I want to communicate or impact on you, a very effective way to do it is to tell you a story. Now, who tells myths today that resonate with the future and the possibilities of existence from a contemporary perspective? Science fiction. So science fiction is the modern mythology of the future. And that's critically important for us. because science fiction gets the whole person immersed in understanding, experiencing reality, from the emotional, the personal, the intellectual, the social side, all of that. So even though myth is a archaic and primitive mode of understanding that goes back thousands of years, it's still in us. People still resonate to it. And I'm not trying to step on anybody's personal sensitivities here because I have no notion what your backgrounds are. But the mindset today that probably is the most dominant mindset about the future is the Zoroastrian mindset, which influenced both the development of Christianity and Judaism and Islam, thinking that eventually a Messiah's come, we're going to have a big battle, good's going to win over evil, the good are going to go to heaven and the bad are going to go to hell. Okay, and your immortal souls are going to end up one of those two places. That's probably more influential as a vision of the future than any other vision in the future today is for the general population. And that's based on a myth in the sense of it's a story that the Persian philosopher Zoroaster came up with in 600 BC. Okay, so myths have a hold on the human mind, and I think that science fiction, at least, it combines the mythic form with contemporary thinking and futuristic thinking, and in all of its different aspects, and that people resonate to.
Sure.
Yeah, it definitely resonate to. By the way, if you ask that question, when you stop and you think about it, it finally hits you that question is incredibly. You really miss something here, because go look at the last year in cinema and how many movies of the top 20 or 30 biggest sales movies are science fiction movies containing mythic-like characters, superheroes. In fact, Marvel Comics now has really gotten into this with all of its various godlike or deity-like beings populating the screen. And, we swallow it up. And we also swallow up the dark side, too, of myths. So we have tons and tons of gothic-like, horror, dark stuff that gets produced in the cinema too, and that's what people get in their heads all the time. So we definitely still love our myths. We just put them in modern settings. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I got to say, thank you so much for joining us. My mind is exceptionally blown right now. I just want to, yeah. I just want to know, do you have anything coming up? I know, I think, are you retired? Do you have anything you want to plug or some work you have coming up?
Yes. Okay. I'm ready to plug. I'm going to give you. Okay. In October, my book, Future Consciousness, The Path to Purposeful Evolution, is coming out. Okay. So it's up on Amazon already. And I've already given a couple talks, but in October, I'm going to be talking on the book in London and hopefully in Paris too, and maybe get out to the East as well sometime then also. So that's my immediate book, Future Consciousness. And if you go up on my website, you can see I have a page up there for the book Future Consciousness. And I get into the whole idea about purposeful evolution and future consciousness and wisdom in a lot of depth in that book. And it's got really good, super advanced endorsements from lots of people. Lots of good people in future studies, including Peter Bishop and Oliver Markley from the University of Houston. The second thing I want to plug is that next year, Volume 1 of my science fiction, The Mythology of the Future, will be coming out as well. And that is going to be something very unique because, as my publisher mentioned, I'm the first person he's ever run across who begins the history of science fiction with the ancient Greeks, which I do. because science fiction goes back all the way to there. So that's going to be a series that's going to come out. Volume 1 goes from Prometheus to the Martians, who we became obsessed with toward the end of the 19th century, especially after we thought we saw the canals on Mars. But that will be a series that I'll be doing over the coming years. I'm putting a course up online on future consciousness. Hopefully I'm doing a series of videos on the science fiction book series. And let's see, that's enough of a plug for the moment.
Well, thanks so much, Tom. We're going to put all this in the show notes. I have myself gotten a lot of wisdom today. Big fan of your work. We're gonna keep it plugged in. Just thanks a lot for joining the podcast today.
Thank you.